Is it possible when someone passes for that person's child to take over their work?
Yes, it is possible. Now you probably want to know how that's possible. Sometimes it's a genetic issue. Sometimes one who leaves, like let's say a father's leaving, everything about the father is known by the child and the rest of the family, especially those who are close to such a person. And so there may exist a psychic need to continue that. So what can happen is a transfer of responsibility. So a child, a son or a daughter can awaken to their own relationship to that occupation if they have it. It can happen suddenly, it can happen spontaneously, where they know it's their job to do. They know a part of themselves is the father, and they do it. Now, they can choose to do it, or they may also come upon a realization that they inherited the same power, the same function, the same skills, and are able to then spontaneously assume responsibility and rise to a skill level faster than others because of this predisposition towards that particular occupation. It could be woodworking, it could be plumbing, it could be any number of things relating to the house, activities relating to construction. So it could be that. Sometimes it can be given to a person in a dream that they have to do it, or they can do it, and that the father or the parent is guiding them, and that can very well happen as well. This happens more than not, more than people think. It happens this way. That's the beauty of the spiritual realm and understanding how it works. That it's really a definite form of guidance, and it's very benign, and it helps to be open to these influences, because a lot of people need these influences to finish work that the family in certain ways needs to have finished by spiritual means. And of course the results are always physical and material in a sense, but the intention and the inspiration is spiritual in nature, subtle, psychic, intentional.
Can you be spontaneous on one or another level of reality?
Yes. You can be spontaneous on all levels of reality, right? Have spontaneity of expression or capability, skill, intuitively speaking, where you have a certain flow, creative flow in one level or one area and not in other areas. So that would be then a specific application of a spiritual gift or an intellectual gift. Some people have it in music. Find it hard to drive a car. Some people have it in painting and might have difficulty expressing themselves through writing or even speaking. So it's relative, absolutely relative. But can you have spontaneity in general? Yes, I think spiritual practitioners are working towards having some kind of realization of selflessness, where they're able to have the inner consciousness move freely into whatever it is they have to do. So they don't really feel it. And we call it creative, but we also call it spiritual in a sense. That means it's mysterious. And what moves people is always a mystery. How it moves people is always mysterious. But the idea is to be open to being moved in such a way where you produce a positive result in this dimension.
Is there a message for the Age of Aquarius that is different from other ages?
Well, if we take, for instance, the past age, 2,000 years, talking about the signs of the times. Well, the message, one of the main messages, if we're talking about Jesus being the one who heralded in the New Age of Pisces 2,000 years ago, we're talking about the message of group consciousness and salvation, community consciousness and salvation, circle of influence, circle of individuals, sympathetic beings that are more in touch with certain kind of heart resonance, And we're not saying it's basically Christian, it's actually native, but it seemed that the person of Jesus was chosen to characterize this and the consequences of assuming that kind of direction in a materialistic world, say, where you have a definite schism of either initiated people and uninitiated people, or awakened people and unawakened people trying to come together. See? And you see the difficulties that arose in his particular situation. So the message there was salvation. See, how does one save oneself from ignorance, suffering, and let's say self-destruction for the most part. This time around, it seems that the message is clearly Aquarian in nature, meaning you have to wake yourself up. You need to step up. You need to wake up, step up. And so the real message of the Masters should be, forget about the past, in a manner of speaking, you know. Remember the present, which creates the future. So be able to let go of obstructions and negative karmas and tendencies and programs that are obsolete, already proven to be obsolete, and move into a position where you can then begin to recreate what needs to be created for the sake of the future, and finding solutions for people to find peace more immediately, more directly. And that's why I say the word is wake up now, and always wake up now and be at peace, or heal yourself on an ongoing basis, so, as soon as possible. So it's not about say going against people. It's not about political rivalry as it may have been in the past age. Now it's about seeing there's more common sameness amongst beings once you get to a certain heart level, where it, not yourself, but it starts to do something which is unique to itself. Then we can see that there's more heart presence, more immediate forgiveness, more understanding, more compassion, and from the same place of spontaneous, say, heart expression, you know, there's more creativity. See? We can create more from there. See? So we can find solutions if people are open enough to do that. But consistent with every age is darkness. We're talking about an age of enlightenment, let's say. And maybe that age is always present. Maybe there's always enlightenment, and that's what we need to open to, is the possibility of enlightenment and free expression. Call it spontaneous, call it creative, but we're talking about free expression. So the heart is free, the body is open, the mind are open altogether.
How does one reach zero heart space?
You're speaking about the book. But you have to have a glimpse of what it is. See? Regarding the subtle worlds, you need to have a glimpse. You need to have a connection with the subtle worlds by glimpse or by some kind of effect or influence or memory. So you have to remember something that happened to you that is indicative of the evidence of the spiritual. Okay. And then you have to keep coming back to that. That's what practice is about. Returning to the basics, returning to original presence, original love, original peace, right? Original sanity, original creativity, see? Original transcendence, see? Original compassion. All of these things, it's like going back to zero. See? You have to keep doing that until you fall into it, you abide in it or reside in it. And it takes care of itself. You have to get to that place. You have to walk towards it. I remember saying, coming from the Hindus, you take one step towards it, it takes 2 steps towards you, say, or the other way around, something like that. See? Which means you have to meet it to some degree. You have to move into it, yeah? And then it moves into you, see, to that degree. So there's a paradox there, but this is really what we're trying to do, is collapse the perception of time in terms of what's happened and what's been happening, which controls us relative to culturing, and want to get to a place where we are being what it is already, see, because it is ever present. So you need to recognize, see, and that's what I'm referring to when I say you need a glimpse of what it is, so that you can start doing what it requires you to do to be what it is, see, because we are already what it is, but not 100%. Let's say we are not that. We're usually a neurotic human being, and that's what we're being. That's the is we can be out here, because what we're talking about is being free of neurosis in order to be what it is, in fact and in truth, see, in heart and in spirit. See.
As a result of spiritual training, does a person hate themselves and sex more? And is there a selfless state?
Well, relative to practice, I think people's attitudes about sex change. If you're actually practicing in a certain way that I can see, works for certain peeps, right, where you start to relax your sense of self, and you just enter a sense of, let's say, more openness, say, relaxation into openness. That doesn't kill your instincts or your programming, but certainly relaxes it, which means you have a bit more consciousness to spare, and consciousness to consider what it is you're doing, maybe even to the degree of understanding what certain consequences may be. So we have consciousness of what starts karma and what is karma, and then what changes karma. So we have a consciousness of, we can say in a manner of speaking, the processes, let's say, involved in arriving at the realization of the Four Noble Truths, saying that there is a cause, how to transform the cause, and what the path is to enable you to, be free of, say, suffering. If we're going to use the word suffering, talking about anxiety, stress, suffering takes so many forms. And so we need to recognize that and see what it is. Now, in the process, what happens is you become free of a certain amount of self-conscious, say, participation in human nature. And that might even be considered more neurotic in a manner of speaking, because it's self-indulgence, ignorant self-indulgence, that causes a lot of suffering for a lot of people. So it causes them to hate themselves and hate others unnecessarily and very immediately because of, let's say, differences and so on. So we need to get beyond this whole psychological field of perception and differences, if it's in the cards for us to do that, and if it's in our best interest to do that. Not everybody's chosen to do that or moved to do that, so it really depends on where you are in let's say, the unfoldment of consciousness. And so, getting back to your point, the more we awaken or unfold into heart consciousness, then you're not going to hate. See, you might hate, but you're not going to hate. You're not even going to hate. It's just not a word that can be used in a sense. Now, there may be things that repel, your feelings, and you might have a sense of responding to it. But we don't know for sure that it's in the realm of hate. In other words, the body still has intelligence of what it needs. So the self has its own sense of what it thinks it needs and believes it needs and sort of seems it needs and desires that it needs. But that is liable to fall away in the purification of fire, real practice, when the heart starts to open up. You see, those needs are not really there. Like the need for, like, say, mechanical sex may disappear. See, unnecessary sex might disappear because you're not in a position anymore to feel it's so insecure that you need to have sex in order to prove to you that somebody loves you, because sex isn't love. Love is not sex. They're two different distinct things, and sometimes they are together. It's one thing, but often they are not, and need to be looked at and judged properly for their functions. You have a heart function relative to love, then you have a sex function relative to, let's say, procreation and what I would call mixing the genes, mixing the consciousness, mixing the fluids, and trying to make sense of that for the sake of either creating a baby or creating changes in yourself, which might make you different to the degree that you won't like the person you're with anymore, and maybe very quickly, because that's what mixing does. It brings you to a crisis of making a quicker decision or perception, having a sharp perception as to what you're doing. And so it doesn't, if we're talking about spiritual practice, we're talking about unfolding beyond things that you begin with when you're not practicing. So when you're not practicing, you're working from impulses that we have to say are more compulsive. In real practice, you get free of compulsions and impulsiveness. You're more relaxed. And you're letting something deeper determine what it is that happens. So in fact, you're turning your life over to a higher or deeper function of your own consciousness. I like to call it the heart. Some people call it spirit. Some would go as far as saying the God force. Others would call it enlightenment, realization. Others would call it all kinds of things. Truth. Truth is having its way, or fire, it's having its way. So you become better, I think, qualified to experience whatever it is in the whole spectrum of human nature. So it's not about hating anymore, it's about experiencing and going beyond. So we're talking about taking steps and seeing everything that shows up as a step to take. And as I also like to add, to be used as wood for the fire.
So does selflessness avoid human nature?
Selflessness is true human nature, but we seem to have not recognized it properly enough. And I think it takes a period of time to be able to differentiate self from selflessness. And they're basically the same thing. They're concepts. We're talking about concepts that are related to what we were talking about before that, relative to spontaneity. And we're not talking about neurotic, impulsive reaction, which shows up as spontaneity. So, well, I felt like doing this, and so I did it with regrets. See? We're talking about a different kind of heart-centered spontaneity that enables you to feel good, really good about everything you do. Now, if you're deranged, then you're going to feel good about destroying people. But that's your happiness. But everybody would know that that's very, very different, even to the degree of condemning it as deranged and inappropriate, violent, destructive behavior. Criminal behavior, even so, worthy of punishment, and so on. But we're talking about something which is more benign and more gracious and more kind and spiritual and serene in a manner of speaking. It's more gentle than that. So we're talking about the selflessness then as some kind of gentle, serene state of consciousness. That's always with us. So we, even as the most selfish people, actually relax that and open up into selflessness on occasion. And often more than anybody thinks. See? And so selflessness is really more like the original nature that we're given, even though it has karma mixed in with it. But it's there. So we know when to let up. Really, each one who's a selfish animal or brute knows when to let up. Okay? And be selfless. And it happens during disasters. Everybody goes into selflessness mode. They don't know that, but they show their better and higher self by feeling and being compassionate towards other peeps. Okay? So selflessness is a natural condition. We need to recover that to 100%. And that's what practice is a ground for in the case of many practitioners.
Is there a self of no self? And if so, how does one get beyond it?
Well, it may not be a self you want to get beyond. See, the self of no self, let's say, is the self we're talking about. See, it is a center self. It is a center, it's a heart center. See, it's a place of, or a mode of operation. See, it's a reality, it's a state of reality. It's one of the planes of consciousness, let's say. Maybe an unidentified plane of consciousness. Maybe it would be called a higher mental plane to a certain degree. Or a degree of the soul plane, maybe pre-soul plane, right there. See, so there's self, but not very much self. See? And so we want the best of both, because once you awaken into no selfless, you need your self-programming to express it. And so you use that very serenely, very gently, and as powerfully as you need to. But that's the force of it is not the reality of it. The force of it is a mode of it. The spirit of it, see, is gone, self. And that's what we're making a distinction about relative to heart nature as distinct from self nature. Heart nature is love nature, self nature is more like business nature. And it's all the same, but you need to make these distinctions because a lot of people are confused about, well, is it myself that is causing me to want to survive and make money? Is that myself or is that selflessness? It's a mix of both. See? It's both compassion and skillfulness. We have to see it as everything at the same time. See, but not all. So the self is not all. Whatever shows up is not all. I think that's the important thing, having an open idea of what it is that can be done and what our potential is as spirits or human beings, if you want to call us human beings, and what the potential is. It's always got to be much more plus element. Okay? What is then is the infinite, not what is in terms of the forms and programs that are either being used or using us in the moment. Is not really what is, the real is, but a part of what the real is. And so our practice has to be being the is of itself. So it gives us a lot of room. It gives us a lot of space. It gives us a lot of, let's say, feeling, presence. It keeps us in the presence. So, spiritual presence. Phew.
Are you doing what you're doing for yourself or for other reasons or by other means?
Well, I'm not sure what the self means in this case. I think it might be a self issue if you're not raised in it. So if it's not in your blood, then it could be a self issue. But in this case, there's nothing to think about. See, it's doing it for the sake of it being done. See, and obviously it's for the sake of other people's needs to know. And I think that could be a foundation for what it is that I'm moved to do. That's to make sure the word is out there for peeps to consider. Not that they particularly need for it or always ask for it, but many people ask me the same question, so I'm responding to what seems to be, to me directly, a need to know, a real need to know. And it seems that in terms of my timeline, I've always known certain things clearly, but I always felt that, well, that's not my business, that's my relatives' business, because they were the guys and they were the others. I said, well, these are similar thoughts. But I realized then, after time passed, I got older, became a little bit more responsible for my own mind and my own processes, that the wisdom was given to me to give to others in a way similar yet different from my ancestors. See, this is a new time, and I have different roots. And as my Aunt Gracie has stated, for the public record in the family record, that this is part of a process that is spirit given. It's not what you desire as such. It will take over. I don't mean possess you like a low spirit will possess you, but it will inspire you, and you must move with that. When you feel it, and you know what it is. See, it's an inspiration. Once you have that warmth in you, it's a warm energy. You have that, you need to get it to the peeps, because then you share the warm energy with the peeps, and you're giving them what belongs to them, not what is yours, but what comes through you for them. And I think that's really what the process is here. Giving to others what they need, what belongs to them, that's given to me to give to them, in the form of, let's say, a male person, right? A male man. Yeah. It's given to us to share, okay? For the happiness, freedom, and deeper understanding of other beings. If that could be accomplished, it would be a great thing. Comment? And that is gratifying. So I enjoy it. Yeah. It's sharing the inspiration, I think, is sort of like a sort of kind of conduction. See? So it's conductive. And as you become inspired, then you share that with other peeps, and it will come through you differently, which is the important thing. See? It has its own current of reality, it has its own way of working. See? So it is true in this case that spirit works in strange ways, and we have to just be in touch with that as a reality, not a theory. If it's a theory, if it's merely an intellectual kind of blip on your screen, that might not work. It has to be something that comes from you when you're at your deepest, you're most relaxed, and you're most selfless. So it's coming from the heart, and without too much bias, even though our conditioning enables us or maybe makes us somewhat relatively biased. We need to be giving our attention and heart to universals, what is universally true, with all due respect to what can be individually true, and only that at the same time. You have a question about the difference between the individual and the universal? See, the individual has to open themselves up to the universal, so that the universal comes down in a way that's unique to the individual, and therefore unique to individuals that are related to that kind of individuality. See, whether that's a cultural individuality, whether that's an artistic, musical, or scientific, or religious, or educational, or political, or military individuality. You see that in all lines throughout history, where you see people coming up and acting as a certain kind of reservoir for their ancestry, and at the same time a transformation station, some kind of furnace for a new version of the ancestral reality, see, an upgrade. See, so I think in this case, relative to where I came from, there's a bit of an upgrade going on right now. See, there's a jazz edition, there's a universal religious edition going on, and a whole different sense of spiritual practice that is also being shared with peeps, much more openness to spiritual practices and respecting and dignifying spiritual practice where it really works and where it's really necessary as something that's definitely part of the self-realization process universally. That is to say, here, there, and everywhere, and even nowhere in particular.
Getting back to the topic of the Age of Aquarius, does technology hinder spiritual practice, or can it aid in bringing us all closer to or recognizing the higher aspect of Aquarius?
We're talking about time. Aquarius means time. Aquarius, in terms of the ancient traditions, means 11. The 11th stage of the creative cycle, where knowledge is the issue. It's the age of knowledge, a certain kind of knowledge. And to your point, technologic knowledge, as well as atomic knowledge, and powerful knowledge, knowledge to destroy the world and the universe even, that kind of knowledge. Profound knowledge, scientifically speaking, and then spiritually speaking, because you don't really have one without the other, you know. They're both basically on the same level. So, do they help one another? Yes, some people are going to be helped by technology. And we see that technology is also helping to ruin the world, but not by itself, in a sense, not particularly by itself. Technology is the effect of intelligence, and so it's the effect of a certain level of intelligence and a certain level of, let's say, heart awareness or lack of heart awareness. So it is then the effect of a certain kind of intention, which could be to control the world in a not so good way. And so, yes, we're talking about a trade-off here relative to having something that's great and then something that's potentially very dangerous and obviously harmful to, let's say, relative to industrial pollution to the earth and all its inhabitants. Life by itself is a dangerous proposition. Living in the universe is a very dangerous proposition. Being on earth is a very dangerous proposition. So we have to accept it for what it shows up as. So it's a dangerous proposition. So we really want more consciousness, more intelligence, more solution-minded peeps, scientifically speaking or otherwise, politically minded peeps, military-minded peeps. And so we have more, let's say, potential here for life and more potential for creating, let's say, a better place to live in. This is hard in these times, as, let's say, the conditions of the earth seem to be spiraling out of control, and there's more water as a result of the meltdown, the Arctic meltdown. And there's not very much you can do about it except brace for the changes that are coming out of this combustion. See, the combustional, let's say, results of the meltdown and having to displace water and the forces and powers of the elements relative to this changing condition now, where water is going to be dominating the surface even more so now. And we have more water, rising water. So the power of the ocean is very primordial, right? We supposedly related to the evolution of species, beginning with the ocean, beginning with earlier stages of creation. And so we're really going back in time, actually, as we're moving forward, we're going back in time and being forced to consider more primitive conditions to survive. All of this is part of the nature of the sort of seesaw play between the higher and the lower, the more progressive and the more, let's say, primitive or regressive nature of human existence, or maybe life on Earth at this point. So the balance is there. We can use technology. A spiritual person can use it for spiritual means, spiritual purposes. And we don't know that that's happening in a dominant sense. See, it's hard to tell with everything going the way it is. It's really hard to say. Now, there are balances of forces, and this is something we need to trust, maybe have confidence in, to a certain degree, that there's a balance for all of the destruction. There's potential recreation. But what we're talking about having to do with time, is that time is running out, in a manner of speaking, in terms of forms of existence, and changing geographies. We have geography that's changing. Earth is dictating where you can be now. See? And this is going to be a problem for peeps, where you're going to have more mudslides, you're going to have more earthquakes, you're going to have more volcanic explosions, and all of these things with the intensification of the, I would say, the turmoil of the Earth in terms of this kind of like position in the galaxy, which is what I guess the profiteers, the prophets were talking about ages ago in terms of the cycle, including Hopi prophets and all of these various schools of prophecy that are looking at the astronomic situation being at the center of the galaxy, so to speak. So all of this is a fact of nature relative to the times, and it's up to the humans to adapt to that. It doesn't seem like the humans are doing much to adapt to that, besides many of them burrowing underground and going into caves and going into mountains and trying to protect themselves and hide themselves from what may be happening sooner than later in terms of the next millennia. And so the idea is to know how to live, not just to survive, how to live as a human being. I think that's really what the urgency should be about, becoming better humans. See, not escapists, see, not just futurists in a sense, becoming better human beings and try to resonate that to the rest of the human race, that we can care more, in a manner of speaking. No one says you have to, but certainly I think the more progressive, evolving, creative intelligences would say, yeah, that seems to be a good option right now. If we have the option to do that, yeah, let's go the way of some kind of goodness. And keep love alive and keep the heart alive. And I think that's what masters like the Dalai Lama are here to promote. He's one of many that are here with the same message, because we're talking about one heart. It's just really one heart. It's the heart of the universe. The universe is the heart is the universe.
What about technology in terms of communication? Is it helping to bring us closer and closing the gap in an Aquarian sense, or is it having the opposite effect where it's sort of tearing us apart?
Well,
and
the technology isn't doing that. The peeps who are using it can do that. The technology is pretty neutral. We're not talking about guns. We're talking about technology for communication, digital communication. That can be used for better or for worse. It might be being used for both right now. See, it's used to promote violence, and it can be used to, stem it somehow, quell it. See. We need more, I guess you might say, pro-heart, not just this kind of like madness about pro-life. I mean, we need pro-heart, see, more pro-compassion, more, let's say, growth in terms of individual relationship to the divinities, more awakening to one's divine nature, not by religious terms, see, not by fanatical terms, but by real heart processes, awakenment, see, into the peace of it. We're talking about the field full of more fanatical, let's say, representation of, let's say, higher forces with a gun. See, so there's a contradiction there. Jesus wasn't, if he's the leader of the whole Christian, let's say, epoch, and the representative of what it is, then you don't have too many people who are showing up as Jesus dictated or spoke. See, lived. He lived a life where he said, turn the other cheek. You don't have anybody turn the other cheek. You have them turning the barrel of the gun, see, for the next bullet. See, so we're talking about being on the opposite spectrum of where Jesus is coming from. I think we have to get to that kind of issue, not in terms of Christianity, in terms of just native human existence, and how to go about, say, downgrading the need for this absolute destructiveness, which is a product of sex gone wild. See, sex gone wild and men gone, let's say, to the testosterone peak. See, that's what we're talking about, blowout. See, so they have to blow up because they're blown out, testosteronically speaking. They have to blow out and blow up everything. See, so we need the heart to be blown open more, so we have a different, I guess you might say, quality of communication out here, apart from the technology. Technology then becomes an aside. It's not important. What about the technology of relating? Say, the technology doesn't have that, but it can be used to, let's say, communicate the message of relating to a certain degree, where we can all be more like in the spirit of the Dalai Lama, promoting what we know is best for human beings, and that's growth and education and peace, good environments, healing the earth. I mean, just basic common sense, information. See, being good to the planet, so to speak. Isolating warfare, when you have people who want to do that and have to do that, isolating it to certain areas of the planet where they can handle it, and they can have their chess games and play their chess games over there, and let the rest of humanity not have to be threatened or violated by such ridiculous and sort of madness, see, Holocaustal madness. So, I mean, there's I guess you might say, conversations that could be had. We need a Congress, we need a World Congress of peacemakers. That's what we need out there. We don't just need the United Nations that doesn't do anything but sit on its hands. So we need a Congress of peacemakers, a peace Congress, where people come together who have influence, like leaders, as well as responsible heart beings from the traditions. And their voice is heard. See, make the heart's voice important. I don't mean just negative emotion, crying about tragedy. No, let's talk about not tragedy, but the comedy of life. That is, we can really create something. This is beauty. And the beauty of intelligence to create, despite the tendencies. And that's why we have to override certain tendencies, so we don't be dead meat in no time. We're not dead meat because we have a counterforce here, which is really pro-life. We don't mean politically pro-life before life. See, we're talking about pro-life in life regarding the living, giving the living the right to live. See, not the unborn, the right to that's maybe understood to a certain degree, but we're talking about the living need the right to live, right? So we need to step up to that, and at the least become like Jesus, a friend of the poor, and the down, trodden, and the weak, those who come in to be helped, where we, the helpers, can dignify ourselves in the process. So this is important. So we're talking about the Age of Aquarius means more means. Aquarius means more means, more skills, more knowledge, more ability, hopefully more heart, see, more spirit, and more soul, see, more creativity, more freedom, see, agreed upon. Not so much by technology, but through technology, to get the message of the heart out there, straight across the board, universally speaking, so that we can make this a better place for, let's say, intergalactic brothers and sisters to come here and do something that can teach us all something very powerful, profound. See? Show up and show ourselves as worthy students of universal knowledge and universal experience and universal consciousness, because right now we're too busy being idiots, see, self-serving idiots, to make this kind of reality, work for us. Comment?
No comment.